It's another year. December was last month, I guess. So let's look back at all the films and TV shows that I watched in the month of December. So for last month, I wanted to pick 12 Christmas films that I hadn't seen before for the 12 days of Christmas, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, to start off, we got Santa Claus. This is an alright film to start the month. Tim Allen was definitely the standout of the film for me. His performance in here is just so charming, and he really elevates all the horrible parts of this film that I didn't like. Most notably the child acting, which was very cringeworthy a lot of the time. I think the concept overall is pretty good, with Tim Allen's character accidentally killing Santa and entering a clause who must take over as the role of Santa. I just think if the writing and the child acting was a bit better, then I would like it a bit more. Did I mention the child acting? I give it a 6. And then I watched Juror number 2. This is the first Clint Eastwood film that I've seen. And I'm not gonna lie, I think his direction's a little bit basic for this film anyway. But the film really shines when it comes to the script and the acting, which I just really loved. This is another one of those films where the concept is just so good and it just hooks you right from the start with it. I also like how unpredictable this film is, and there's so many moments where it could go in multiple directions. I also found myself switching sides a lot during this film and rooting for someone I didn't think I should be rooting for, which was probably done intentionally by the writers. I think it's just one of the best films of last year for me. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the Jim Carrey one. This is one of the few Jim Carrey films that I haven't seen in full before. I remember I had it on DVD, I think, and it's on TV a lot around Christmas, so I've seen clips from it in that, but I haven't gotten round to it fully until now. And it's one of those films where Jim Carrey just really saves it, I think without his over-the-top performance as the Grinch, this film would be completely forgotten about. But his performance is so unbelievably good in here that it makes this whole film worth watching. I do think the film overall has a little bit of charm as well, even though it looks kind of ugly. There's so many Dutch angles in here and just disgusting close-ups of the practical effects of the Who's, who are just really uncomfortable to look at. Overall though, it's a pretty solid holiday film. Again, mostly for Jim Carrey's performance of the Grinch. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Dr. Seuss's The Grinch, the Illumination version with Benedict Cumberbatch. It's just so lifeless. I found this to be so lifeless. I don't think even Benedict Cumberbatch could have saved this film. Everything just felt drawn out, even though it's shorter than the Jim Carrey version. And this really made me realise how bad Illumination looks. I just hate how everyone speaks in this film. I don't think there was a single joke in this film that made me laugh. And it just feels way too kid-oriented. Again, especially when comparing it to the Jim Carrey version. At least there was a Brockhampton Neil drop in there, I guess. I don't know. I give it a 5. And then I watched The Nightmare Before Christmas. This is a film that took me a really long time to get to, mainly because I couldn't decide whether to watch it at Halloween or Christmas. Like I've said before, I love stop motion films, and the stop motion for this film is just amazing. I especially love the character design for all these characters. They're all just so unique and creative. I also really like the musical numbers, which I wasn't expecting, as I'm not the biggest fan of musicals. I didn't even know Danny Elfman was a singer. I thought he just did scores, but his vocals really suit the musical numbers in here. I do think the story is maybe a little bit too outlandish, and it wraps up a bit too fast for my liking, but overall, I really liked it. I give it an 8. And then I watched Happiest Season. This was nothing special in terms of rom-coms, but I found it to be an enjoyable and really funny rom-com. There's some really well done gags. I do think the plot is a little bit generic for a rom-com. I basically watched the male version of this film, Red, White and Royal Blue, earlier last year, but I think this film kind of does it a little bit better, and it just has a classic Christmas feeling to it, which you kind of want from a Christmas film, obviously. Yeah, I give it a 6.5. Then I watched The Polar Express. I don't really like motion capture animation, especially Robert Zemeckis' motion capture animation, so this was just an uncomfortable watch for me throughout. There were some really good sequences in here, like the scene with the tickets, and some great roller coaster first person scenes that work really well and take you on this journey with this main character. But boy is it disturbing in some points. The most uncanny valley thing about this movie is how the kids move. You can tell they're being played by adults because they're moving like adults, but they've obviously animated them as children, so it just makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. I overall like the story, which I'm pretty sure is based on a children's book, and the voice acting is overall pretty good, especially Tom Hanks. He plays multiple characters in here, but I just can't help but feel extremely uncomfortable watching it, so I give it a 6. And then I watched Hit Record, the incomplete history of the music video. There's a 7-part documentary on the incomplete history of the music video, from its inception all the way back in the 1800s got to what is today. I came across this on my recommended on YouTube from Polyphonic, who I used to watch back in the day, but I kind of rediscovered with this documentary. Overall, I found it to be a really interesting watch, even though it took a while to kind of get going. I thought the early 1900s stuff with the music videos kind of boring. All the MTV stuff and the changes that took place with MTV in like the 80s and 90s, I just found it really interesting. That's coming from someone who was obsessed with music videos back in the day as well. Back in the day, I used to watch all like the British music channels like 4Music and Viva. I just used to watch those channels all day. They're just like chart countdowns of all the music videos, and they just play all the music videos, and I just sit there and just watch it all day. I was obsessed. I found this documentary extremely interesting. I'll leave a link to it down in the description if I remember. Then I watched Last Christmas. This is just such a generic rom-com that decides to pull an insane twist last minute that didn't work for me at all. I do really like the soundtrack, as I'm a big fan of George Michael and Wham. Aside from that, it has the most basic ass plot, and it's so overly cheesy. I thought Emilia Clarke was good in the lead role, and she was charming enough a character to follow, along with some of the side characters, like the one played by Michelle Yeoh, and of course Henry Golding playing the romantic interest. And then the twist happens, and the more I thought about it, the funnier it became. It literally took the lyrics of Last Christmas and took it literally. Like, yeah, I kind of respect them for doing that, but also it's kind of horrible. I give it a 5. And then I watched Wallace and Gromit: The Wrong Trousers. I decided to rewatch this for the new film that came out on Christmas that I'll go over later in this video, but this is such a classic. First of all, it's such a feat in stop motion animation. Everything just looks so authentic and amazing in here. You can see like smudges and the fingerprints all over the clay figures. The character of the penguin is just so good as well. And I just love how most of the story is told without dialogue, because most of the characters can't talk. It's a classic. I give it 10. And then decided to follow up with Curse of the Were-Rabbit. This was one from my childhood that I loved, and overall it really holds up. The biggest standout for me in this film is the voice acting, whereas the last short I watched only features one voice actor, obviously the voice actor for Wallace. This one has many more great side characters that just have such distinct voices. I especially like Ralph Fiennes' voice performance in here. Just the delivery of most of his lines in here were just so funny. I think the stop motion animation is great again, although there are some moments where there's some clear digital effects applied in places that do kind of cheapen the movie in some points. But overall, great story, great characters. I give it a 9. And then I watched Heretic. This one I overall really liked, even though I thought it kind of jumped the shark in the final act. Hugh Grant puts in an amazing performance as this religious obsessed guy who just gets more unnerving as the film progresses. I was just hanging off every single line he said. His delivery is just so good. And he does actually make some good points about religion, that these two Mormons rebound and create this kind of debate, which I liked. I think it did start to lose me a bit when they introduced this supposed disciple of God and this whole magic trick thing. It's like the story got a bit too big for its own beats, and I just wasn't the biggest fan on how it ended. That first half was really good though, and Hugh Grant really steals the show throughout. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Krampus. This is a really fun seasonal horror comedy that works so well because of the ensemble cast. The practical effects for this film also look surprisingly good, and there are some generally horrific and some generally funny moments in here, which is sometimes a hard balance to achieve with some horror comedies. I do think maybe it should have had an R rating, as a lot of the kills or the captures in here from Krampus don't have the impact that I wanted it to have. And there's just some moments in here where the audio track of someone speaking would just cut out when someone's about to say a naughty word. And it kind of reminds me of Die Hard 4, where they do the same thing. I was watching like the director's cut or the naughty cut as well, so I thought they were gonna like reintegrate like the explicit scenes back in or whatever, but no, they didn't do that. But I think overall it makes the most of the PG-13 rating. So yeah, I give it a 7. And then I watched Venom: The Last Dance. I think this is the weakest out of all the Venom films, but I still had such a fun time with it. I know people hate these films, but I just find them so goofy and fun, and I just had a massive grin across my face the whole time. I know people's complaint with this film as well was that there was too much focus on the Eddie and Venom antics, but that's what I love. That's what I come to the film to see. You know, I come to the film to see Tom Hardy being really goofy. He's just hamming it up in here again and there's just some really fun side characters that come into the fold in here as well, like the hippie family. I do think they kind of lazily found a way to keep Venom's full form out of the screen for a good chunk of the film, probably to cut back on the CGI budget, and that did mean less of Venom rampaging around and killing people, so I was a little bit disappointed in that sense. And there's a subplot about these scientists I didn't care that much for. Again, the main storyline with Venom and Eddie is just so fun as always. I give it a 6. Then I watched The Holiday. This surprised me with how much I liked this film, because it gave me some Love Actually vibes from the poster and even the beginning of the film with like the narration about love. And I think Love Actually is actually a little bit overrated, I'm sorry, but this film ended up branching into its own direction and having a really fun story with some really fun characters. It is a bit cheesy in some points, but it manages to work really well with the tone of the film, and there's some really fun moments that almost break the fourth wall, which are just so charming. I really love this film. I'd be open to rewatching it Christmas after Christmas now. I give it an 8. Then I watched Tokyo Godfathers. There's a really well animated roller coaster of emotions. There's some really funny moments in here involving these homeless people trying to get this baby back to its owner. And there's also some really good emotional character development where you really get to connect to these characters and their backstories. There's so many good twists and turns in here that I like. And the ending was pretty satisfying as well. I don't really have much else to say. I don't know. I give it an 8. And then I watched The Family Stone. I found this film to be so in the middle of the road. It's kind of infuriating. Most of this film takes place in this household with this family, and I feel like the film should have made the house feel kind of more welcoming and kind of like a character of its own if it's going to take up all of this runtime, but the house just kind of feels fake for a lot of it, along with a lot of these characters, some who are just so one note and forgettable, and there's some other characters who are just way too overly written and have all these unnecessary scenes that add nothing to the film. Sarah Jessica Parker's character in here is really infuriating, and she doesn't have all that much character development for the main focus of the story. There are some moments that had me smiling a bit, and there's some charming bits here and there, but it's just so nothing. I don't know. I give it a 5. And then I watched Last Christmas Unwrapped. This is a documentary about the song Last Christmas by Wham, obviously, how the song and the video were made and the lasting impact that it still has today. There was a lot of padding in here. There's these talking heads that are brought in to waffle about some really specific thing that happened during the time the song was recorded or something like that. And there's a lot of goofing around from Andrew Ridgeley and his friends, but the main story of how the song came together is really interesting, along with the Wham friend group revisiting the filming location for the video without George, and it ends on a pretty sweet note. So I give it a 7. And then I finished Arcane Season 1. This show took me way too long to get to. I've heard nothing but amazing things about this show. I'm annoyed that I didn't get to this show until last month because it's so solid. First of all, I really think the animation is just absolutely phenomenal. I love when 2D animation and 3D animation is used together in such a unique way, like in the Spider-Verse films and the latest DreamWorks films, and this is just no exception. It's just beautiful to look at. The story going on here is great as well. It started off a bit slow, but I like the character dynamics. And then the third episode happened, and then suddenly these character dynamics changed up even more and became extremely exciting. And then the fourth episode, you have this time jump that manages to work really well and catches us up in a really interesting way. And then from there, it's just hype moment after hype moment. I give it a 9. And then I watched Anora. I really love how this film manages to find humour in the most odd of places, and it had a story that was so outlandish but also like really grounded. It's just a film unlike anything I've seen before, and I mean that in the best of ways. I thought Annie was played so well by Mikey Madison, and I like how she has this kind of personality as a sex worker that kind of slowly gets stripped away, no pun intended, as the film progresses. And I like how it feels like she struggles to keep up this personality as all these crazy events are going on around her. The filmmaking in here is amazing as well. There's just some really great cinematography and really great progressions and transitions from scene to scene. I definitely won't be surprised if this gets nominated for an Oscar or two. Yeah, I give it 9.5. Then I watched Carry On. This film had a lot of buzz on Letterboxd, a lot of people talking about it. Going in, I expected it to be a really generic action film, but what I got was an extremely investing and fun drama. I was actually getting giddy and like jumping out of my chair in some sequences in this film because of how tense they were. There's a scene that takes place inside of a car, and it's probably one of the coolest sequences that I've seen from a film last year. There's some really great back and forth moments between Taron Egerton and Jason Bateman's characters as well, and it's just super fun working out who's ahead of who and who's planning against who. The third act is a little underwhelming, and there's a little bit too much focus on the wife, but aside from that, it's an extremely hype action film. I give it an 8. For some reason, I forgot to write down any notes or anything to do with this, but yeah, I finished watching Dan. This is such a crazy, weird anime, but it's so fun. It's surprisingly really funny for anime as well. I don't find anime that funny. I find a lot of the jokes over the top and just annoying a lot of the time, but Dan is actually one of those rare animes that I found generally funny. I do think the ending was a bit weird. It felt like a mid-season episode, but it was the season finale, so it felt a bit odd. But season 2 comes out this year, so I'm excited to see what it has in store. I give it like a 8. And then I watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the 50-minute TV special, I guess. This is the last of my 12 Days of Christmas watches, and overall I thought it was a fun stop motion special. I like Gene Autry as the snowman who narrates everything. He kind of feels a little bit comforting in a way, and the stop motion animation of it all kind of gives way to some really funny moments, unintentional or not. It kind of reminded me of the earlier seasons of South Park in that sense. I like how they expand the story of Rudolph in here as well, and how they involve this island of forgotten toys and this Yeti and this elf who wants to be a dentist. It's very fun. I give it an 8. And then watch Actors on Actors. Variety put out a bunch of these onto their YouTube over the first few weeks of December, so I gave some of them a watch. I skimmed through most of them, but I watched the Andrew Garfield and Ryan Reynolds one in full. I really like the conversations they had about each other's films and the conversations they had about their personal lives, which I like hearing from actors. I also watched the Colman Domingo and the Kieran Culkin episode, and similarly their back and forth is just really fun and really interesting. I recommend giving that one a watch in particular because their chemistry is just so good, and I came out of it having a newfound appreciation about their two actors and about acting as a profession, to be honest. And then I watched How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the original one now. I decided to complete off the kind of trilogy, I guess, by watching the original 25-minute short. I actually brought this one on 4K because I thought I might return to it in following Christmases. So yeah, I decided to get the 4K for it, I guess. And yeah, it is the best out of all the Grinch films. It's the most straightforward out of the bunch, and nothing feels overly dragged out or expanded upon. It's just really classic. So yeah, I don't have much else to say. I give it 8.5. And then I watched Jingle All the Way. I gave this a rewatch with my brother who hadn't seen the film before, and I think we had a really fun time with it. I just love Arnold Schwarzenegger being in a Christmas movie. Just the concept of that alone is amazing, and he weirdly fits the tone of the film, and he plays this character so serious in some points and then just gets proper goofy in other parts, and it's just so funny. The concept of this character running around trying to get this toy last minute for his son is kind of exciting to watch as well, and all these twists and turns take place and all these things are going wrong. I do think the third act kind of goes over the line with goofiness and becomes way too stupid, but this film is just overloaded with great Christmas charm, you know. That mostly comes from Arnie. I give it 7.5. And then I watched Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I again watched this with my brother in cinemas this time, and I think it's the best out of the trilogy. Jim Carrey was great in the last two films, but he's just on a whole other level with this one, playing both Robotnik and his grandfather. There's just so many amazing moments involving their characters that had me smiling in the cinemas. I'm not gonna lie, I had a slightly hard time focusing on the film because there were these two what sounded like 14 to 15 year olds in the cinema who were just shouting and waffling away basically the whole runtime, and I actually wanted to fight them. I really like the new trio of Sonic, Tails and Knuckles in here, and I like that we get to see more of them after the last film, and it ends in a surprisingly emotional place. I give it an 8. And then I rewatched Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. I watched this with the Weekly Planet commentary track, so I didn't have my full undivided attention on it, but I've seen it many times. It's not as good as the first. The Pigeon Lady scenes kind of destroy the pacing a little bit for me, but I do like the new setting of New York. Macaulay Culkin is just as charming as always as Kevin, and Tim Curry is just so funny in her. So yeah, 7.5. And then I rewatched The Holdovers. I gave this a rewatch for Christmas Eve, and it's just still my favourite Christmas film. Everything about this film is just so warm and Christmassy. I like how it focuses mostly on the period between Christmas and New Year's, which a lot of Christmas films don't tend to focus on. The conclusion of this film is just so heartwarming, yet kind of melancholic, and it's just perfect. It's perfect. Great performances all around as well. 10. And then I rewatched Die Hard. I'm rewatching a lot of stuff around this Christmas period, but yeah, it's such a good action film, and it kind of paved the way for so many great action films that came after it. Just iconic characters, iconic story beats, iconic one-liners. I give it 9.5. And then I watched Wallace and Gromit Vengeance Most Fowl. This is not as good as Curse of the Were-Rabbit, but I think it's pretty close. It works as a good continuation of The Wrong Trousers, with the Blue Diamond and Feathers McGraw returning, but it also really works well as its own pretty standalone Wallace and Gromit story with the gnomes. The stop motion in it is as phenomenal as always, and it's just a very charming watch. I also really think the new voice actor for Wallace is basically unrecognisable. I can't really tell the difference, but I think he took over from the role of Peter Sellers really well. So yeah, I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Gladiator II. I had some really annoying internet buffering issues whilst watching this film, so I had to watch it over 2 days because of that, which was really annoying, but I still enjoyed it for the most part. It continues from the last film in a really great way, following the Cinemaximus, and I feel like Ridley Scott really wanted to up the fight scenes from the last film, and they're just really fun to watch, even though maybe they do get a bit over the top with these monkeys with the big teeth and that. Denzel Washington is just the biggest standout here. He really commands the screen every scene he's in, and his character might be the most interesting out of this whole duology. I think this is kind of like the last film, where I went into it expecting to be disappointed, but I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it a 7. Then I watched Joker Folie Deux. Yeah, some people are not going to be happy about what I have to say about this, but I've been putting this film off for a bit now after hearing all the negative buzz surrounding it, but it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. The cinematography is phenomenal for one. There's just so many amazingly lit shots in here and colourful sequences that take place in Arthur's mind that kind of contrast the bleakness of the real world and Arkham Asylum really well. Most of the stuff in the asylum, especially near the start, I found to be really engaging, and there's all these long shots that really put you in Arthur's shoes. Now getting into the bit that people hated, the musical numbers. And whilst a lot of them went on for way too long and added nothing to the plot, all of them kind of go on for way too long and don't really add nothing to the plot. But they're fun though. They're fun. Lady Gaga's Harley Quinn-like character was interesting in the second half, until you realise she has like a major Joker fetish and just completely turns on Arthur in the third act. Speaking of the third act, there's so many odd decisions, and I get why people were saying that the director, Todd Phillips, hated the way his last film was received, so he kind of tried to undo it in this film, and it's really sloppy. But again, I didn't find it to be horrible, and it took some really interesting risks. Some paying off more than others, but I don't know. I give it a 6. And then I watched Lord of the Rings The Two Towers. It took me a while, but I finally got back to finishing the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the extended editions, and I wasn't expecting to like this one as much as the first on rewatch, but after watching it, I still found it to be basically perfect. The Battle of Helm's Deep is just so epic and really well done, and of course you've got all the stuff with Frodo and Sam and Gollum, which is great to see, and Andy Serkis is just an absolute legend. It's a 10. And then I finished Arcane Season 2. I'm not gonna lie, I think the season is a little bit overrated. Saying that, it is like a 9 out of 10, but people act like this season is the greatest season of a show ever, and I don't agree. I think it continues the events of Season 1 extremely well, and all the stuff between Vi and Jinx is so well done, and ends in the most perfect place that it could. And Victor was a surprising standout in the season as well, becoming a messiah of sorts, but I kind of found a lot of the political stuff going on to be a little hard to follow a lot of the time, and there's just some episodes where it's the sole focus, and then there's some others where it hardly matters the plot at all, and it does make for some pacing issues. Aside from that though, the voice acting is just phenomenal again. Animation is just insane. There's some shots in here that are just worthy going up in the most prestigious art museums in the world, and there's just some really emotional moments in here that also double as some great character development. The finale is great as well. Like, it ends in a perfect place. Yeah, I give it a 9. And then I finished off the Lord of the Rings trilogy with Return of the King. This is so good. It's so good. I just forgot how unbelievably good this film is. There's so many moments in this film where I felt like standing up and clapping because I was actually experiencing the pinnacle of cinema. What Peter Jackson managed to achieve in this film is just insane, and kind of similar to Arcane, everything just comes to the most perfect conclusion. Oh, it's a 10. And then I finished off the year with A Real Pain. This film felt surprisingly cozy and comforting for a story about two cousins going on a Holocaust tour. There's some great chemistry between all the characters in here that make for some really realistic scenes. You've also got so many personal and quiet moments in here that just let you take in everything as well as some really chaotic and funny moments that work so well because of the contrasting personalities of Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin. Yeah, this is one of my favourites of the year. I give it a 9. So yeah, that is, oh god, the voice crack. That is everything I watched in December. I'm currently still watching the Graham Norton show. Again, it's a really solid chat show. I don't really have much else to say. So if you like, if you like, if you don't dislike, things together, bad company get things together, bad company get things together, bad company get things